All right, I'm going to get started. So let me start by explaining where this comes from. I have been teaching listing presentations for many years, and there have been years where I have personally listed more than 150 homes in a single year. That's not new construction, that's listing by listing. I've had months where I've listed more than 30 homes in 1 month. The problem I've had is that when I'm trying to teach agents to do this, and when I go through scripts and I try and do it line by line, nobody wants to practice, drill, and rehearse to get those lines down. And they have a hard time understanding how to mirror what I do or what Tim does or what one of the most successful agents does, any of the successful agents the company does. So going back a number of years, we had an agent who started with us. She's since passed away, but she was concerned about going on a listing presentation by herself. And I actually co-listed, I think 60 or 70 properties with her. And I did that because by the time we were done, she said exactly the same things I did, and she ended up being our top agent for a long time. It's not rocket science to do this, but I have to explain it a certain way because unfortunately, so many people don't understand it. So let me explain something else. Once a month, some agent calls me, and I apologize if one of you is on this webinar today. And that agent says, hey, they won't list with me until I give them an itemized list of the websites we're going to market the house on. Let me make this clear. They don't care what websites the house is on, and they are not going to hire you. You've already lost it because that's an excuse, not a question. And I get this question, like I said, probably once a month from realtors. Well, we need to know what websites are on. It's on all of them. Well, I need a list. No, it's several thousand. It's on all of them. And I've been preaching for years that what gets a listing is making the seller feel comfortable and feel that you care and getting the seller to like and trust you. That's the entire game. The presentation itself is secondary to how they feel. And that's a really hard thing for agents to understand. I actually had an agent a month or so ago, and again, I apologize if you're on the call, but I've had this happen more than once. An agent called and said, hey, I went and met with a seller, and I did a presentation. They really like me, but I need you to call them and explain how we market the property. Can you get the listing for me? And the answer is typically no, because once you've left that appointment, you've already lost. You can't get it back. Teresa and I were at this Tom Ferry event in California, and there was a speaker there, Andrew Umdahl, who you may have seen in different videos around the country. He's averaging 2 listings a day in the Baltimore area. And by the way, he's concentrating on high value and luxury homes. 2 listings a day. How many of you think that someone who can list 2 houses a day might know what he's doing? He's been doing that for more than 8 years. He came into the real estate industry from car sales. He's done extremely well, extraordinarily well with his listing presentation and being able to build a portfolio. Now he's building a team. He has a book coming out next month. It's called Control Selling System. And he's broken the process of a listing appointment into 9 parts. And if you miss any one part, you dramatically reduce your chances of listing the property. And it's effectively the same basic strategy I've used forever, but the concept of 9 C's lays it out so much more cleanly than I have in the past that I wanted to apply it here. Now, I did spend probably 12 to 15 hours putting these slides together for you, so I hope you follow along to get something out of it. Now, when most agents hear listing presentation, they immediately start thinking about the presentation itself. How good is my PowerPoint or my flip chart or my book? How impressive is my CMA? Do I have examples of my professional photography or a flyer? Do I have a drone video? Do I have a really impressive page showing all the websites the listing is going to appear on? And what I want to suggest today is that the presentation itself is probably one of the least important parts of winning the listing. Not unimportant, it should be excellent, but it's secondary because the homeowner isn't really hiring a PowerPoint presentation. They're hiring somebody to guide them through what is probably one of the largest financial transactions of their life. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Not how to give a better pitch, how to conduct a better listing appointment. And the biggest shift is right here. Stop presenting and start leading. Because if the secret to winning listings were simply prettier PowerPoints, somewhere there's a Canva designer that would be making $4 million a year selling houses. And this is probably the most important mindset in the entire program I'm going to talk about today. You are the product. See, we tend to think we're selling all the things on the left side of the screen. Our photography, our drone video, Zillow advertising, social media, open houses, and the Central Toland brand. And all those things matter. But here's the problem. Your competitor probably has most of them too. Professional photography for a decent house, a high-end house, is no longer some unbelievably competitive advantage. It's not. Wait, you've got a photographer? Welcome to 2026. What is the seller really choosing? They're choosing your judgment, your confidence, how well you communicate, whether they trust you to negotiate, whether you've got a strategy, whether you can solve problems when something inevitably goes sideways, because it will, and whether they believe you can lead them through a process they don't completely understand. And that's the real product. The seller owns the house. What we're selling is our ability to get them from where they are today to where they want to be next. And your marketing supports your value. It is not by itself your value. And I hope that makes sense. You probably do not need a better listing presentation. And by the way, if you don't know, I have on our shared drive, and I'll send it out again today, various listing presentations, a residential one, a commercial one, a luxury property one, a lakefront one, and a farm one. But you probably don't need a better listing presentation. You probably need a better listing appointment process, and they are not the same thing. A presentation is what you show at the end. An appointment is everything that happens before you arrive, when you walk in the door, how you make them feel, the questions that you ask, how you tour the house, how you handle the price question, because there is always a price question, how you establish their motivation, how you figure out whether both spouses actually agree about moving in the first place, and how you discover that the $700,000 they want for the house is actually because they need $180,000 net to buy the next house. And all of this happens before you ever really present anything. And this is where the 9 C's framework that Andrew Undum put together in his upcoming book resonated with me so much, because it gives structure to something that I think is the best listing agents have intuitively done for years. The problem is we've historically called the whole thing a listing presentation. And that name encourages us to do exactly the wrong thing, which is present. We hear listing presentation, and apparently we conclude, excellent, I should begin talking and keep talking until somebody signs something. And that's not the case. The actual presentation where you talk about marketing in his format begins at number 7. And again, he's listing 2 properties a day. Number 7 is consult. I want that to sink in for a minute. We're talking about the 9 C's. We don't really present until C7. Before I ever make a recommendation, I've gone through making them comfortable, showing I care, building connection, taking control of the appointment, clarifying what we're going to do, crystallizing what their needs and goals are, and only then at step 7 do I consult. And think about how different that is from the way that many listing appointments happen. The agent walks in, and within 5 minutes, they say, okay, let me tell you about myself. Why? They don't know what the seller needs yet. And then here's our great marketing plan. Well, that's great. Marketing what? To whom? For what objective? On what timeline? With what constraints? We're giving the prescription before we've done the diagnosis. Imagine going to the doctor and you tell him that you have a pain in your stomach, and he says, I think we should remove your gallbladder, before he actually asks any other questions. You probably appreciate getting some questions first. And yet that's essentially what we do when we walk into a listing appointment, and we start immediately presenting solutions. So the first 6 C's earn us the right to make a recommendation. Now, this is the listing track I've used. I'm not going to spend any time on this today, but this is what I've been teaching for many years. Do a pre-presentation by calling them and getting data gathering. Drop off a resume book. Now, by the way, Andrew doesn't do this, but I think it's a great tool to still use. Get something into their hands that'll build a connection with them before you get there. Prepare yourself to be comfortable in front of them. Visualize what you're going to do. Ring the doorbell, smile, always smile, because we tend to try and look professional and we'll look like we're frowning. Pay a sincere compliment at the front door. Oh, this is beautiful. Did you decorate it yourself? Take them to the kitchen table, because that becomes your base of operations. Break the ice. Take them out on, ask a big question, take them out on a safe island, which is basically taking control of the situation, explaining to them what you're going to do today. Ask a series of questions because you want information, but you also want to show them that you care about them and their situation. Actually write down the answers so that they like and trust you. Then tour the home before you ever get into a marketing and servicing presentation. That's the track we've been teaching. Now, this is the layout that he has. Now, I actually created this house around it. His was just boxes. But I like this visual because it really captures the architecture of the process. At the bottom here is the foundation. We have to be comfortable and make them comfortable. We have to show them that we care, and we have to build a connection. If those aren't solid, everything else becomes unstable. Then comes the structure, controlling the appointment. And I'll get to why that's important and what I mean by that. Clarifying their objectives and crystallizing it. This is where we start organizing the appointment and understanding what the seller actually needs and getting agreement around the objective. And only then do we get up here to the top where we can consult with them, close for the listing, and confirm that what we're going to be doing next. So here's what many agents often try to do. They build the roof first. They arrive and they immediately consult. Hey, here's what your house is worth. And then they close. Sign here, press hard because it's carbon. And then they're surprised when the whole structure falls apart. But the sequence really matters. You can't shortcut the foundation. The average agent lists 1 out of every 4.2 listing appointments they go on. I list more like 3.5. So you have to make sure that you're approaching it the right way. You have to build this foundation first. You can't shortcut that. I want you to think about these not just as 9 separate sales techniques. They're progressive. Each one makes the next one easier. And at each one of these levels, the seller's making a different decision about us. At the first level, comfort, care, and connection, the seller's essentially asking, do I feel comfortable enough with this person to talk openly? And that earns us permission. Permission to ask better questions, permission to hear the real story, because sellers don't tell us the truth in the first 5 minutes, not because they're dishonest, because they don't know us yet. And maybe they just think maybe they are just moving. We're just thinking about moving. But maybe their employer wants them to be in Atlanta in 6 weeks. Or maybe their house is too small and they're losing their minds. Or maybe their kid is a drummer and is rocking the entire house. They need a garage or a basement where they can insulate it. Maybe they're getting divorced. Maybe they already bought another house. That happens too, doesn't it? Maybe they need $225,000 out of this house, or the entire next move falls apart. And that information we'll get into later. I've told a story a couple of times, and I apologize. I'll repeat myself too much. I won't get into it too far. Where Teresa and I went on a listing appointment in South Allentown, and the couple sat there. The husband had his wife on the back of the chair of the wife, and they talked about how they just wanted to move. They weren't going to buy anything yet because they really just wanted to figure out their options later. And I kept doing a technique which is called asking, why is that important to you? If you can ask that 10 times in a row, you get to the heart sometimes of the emotion behind the transaction. And I kept saying, well, why is that important to you? Well, why is that important to you? And at the end, he finally stood up and said, because she slept with every person I know. And she stood up and said, I had vanilla and I wanted the other 80 colors, flavors or whatever. It completely fell apart. He ran into the garage crying. She ran into the bedroom crying. And I sat there not knowing what to do. By the way, I did eventually get the listing, and they did actually refer me business. But they don't necessarily tell us the truth because they think it's going to impact what we tell them in price. And for us to give them the best advice we can and to make a connection with them on a deeper level, we need to understand what exactly they're looking for. Now, level 2 earns trust. Level 1 is building permission. Level 2 earns trust. Now they're thinking the agent actually understands what we're trying to accomplish. And level 3 is what actually earns the listing. This is the strategy I believe in and the person I want executing. So permission to trust to the listing. Now you can shortcut it sometimes to get the listing, but then you're listing 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 listings, aren't you? And the reality is you're not building that deep connection where they're going to refer you a lot of business over time. So on the left-hand side, we have the traditional pitch. You arrive, you tour the house, you sit down and talk about how wonderful you are, you present the CMA, you explain marketing, you argue over the commission, you argue over the price, and you ask for the listing. That is a remarkably common sequence. It's what most agents do. And notice that most of that is about us. How great I am, how great my company is, what my marketing is, my CMA, my commission, and my listing agreement. Now, on the right side is what Andrew was calling his controlled selling system. Prepare before arriving, create comfort, demonstrate care, and build a connection with the client. Control the appointment, clarify their motivation, crystallize their priorities, consult with them, close, and confirm. Now notice who, and I'll step through each of these. Notice who this side's about. It's about them. And that's the fundamental shift. Traditional selling asks, how do I convince these people to hire me? Controlled selling asks, how do I understand what they're trying to accomplish well enough that I can recommend the right strategy and can demonstrate that I'm the right person to execute it. The traditional model could almost be summarized as arrive, admire the backsplash, explain greatness, discuss money, and ask for a signature. The goal isn't to become better at pitching, it's to become better at leading. Now, one of the things I've taught for years is a great listing appointment begins before the appointment. The moment is scheduled, the process is started. What do you do between the initial phone call and the time you ring the doorbell? Most agents schedule the appointment, put it on the calendar, and then sometime roughly 11 minutes before leaving the office, they print a CMA and hope the printer is still online. And I'm not kidding. I probably get 2 calls a week from agents. And again, I'm not trying to pick on anybody because so many agents do it. I have a listing appointment in 45 minutes. I have heard this in the last 2 days. I have a listing appointment in 45 minutes. I have to leave here in 20. I need help with a CMA. I don't know what it's worth. Really hard to put together a professional presentation and proposal on your way out the door. Again, that's not a competitive strategy. If I know I'm meeting with somebody tomorrow night at 6, I've got at least 24 hours to begin demonstrating something to them. Not just putting together the CMA, but demonstrating to them that I'm prepared, that I'm professional, that I care about them. That is the single most important thing we can do, is show them that we care, that we're curious about their situation, and to build some authority. I want the seller thinking before I've ever arrived, ever gotten there, that this person is taking our meeting seriously. That's how you begin winning before you ever get there. Think about the last 3 listing appointments you've been on. What did the seller experience from you between the moment they scheduled the appointment and the moment you knocked on their door? So, and I've said this in other training, before we do anything, we call them back with a pre-listing call. Now, again, in my prior training, I talked about dropping off a resume book, and that is a powerful way to build a connection with them because they'll find something in that resume book they like about you. But I'm going to shortcut it for today and just cut it down to that pre-listing call. A pre-listing call is not a 45-minute discovery section. It's just a short, intentional conversation that helps me to understand what I'm walking into. And that first question may be the most valuable. What would you most like us to accomplish when we meet? Let's say that again. What would you most like us to accomplish when we meet? Think about what they might say. They might say, I just really want to understand what my house is worth. Okay, great. They might say, I need to know whether we have to renovate before we sell. That's a different meeting. They might say, we don't know whether we should sell first or buy first. Different meeting. They might say, my biggest concern is that I can't have people coming through the house every night because we have 3 kids and a dog who believes every visitor is an assassination attempt. Again, different meeting. So then I ask, is there anything specific that you're worried about? Now they're giving me the objective before I ever get there, and that's powerful. I will ask who else should be involved in the conversation. Now, I was on a listing appointment last week, I think. The husband was there, the wife wasn't. I usually shortcut this ahead of time. Well, the wife had to work, or the wife had to take the dog out for a walk. You know, the dog will bark at you, and didn't want that happening. We just really need the price. That actually hurts the entire listing process. So we want to ask up front, who else should be involved in the conversation? And it's huge. Sometimes it's a parent or a brother or somebody else who isn't involved in it. There are few experiences in real estate more character building than giving an absolutely brilliant listing presentation and hearing, that was great. I'll explain it all to my husband when he gets home. And maybe we could have included him or changed the time so they both can be there. And the next question is, have you ever sold a home before? I do that so I understand their experience level. And are you planning to purchase another property? That one question can completely change the listing strategy. And by the way, if they are planning on purchasing another property, is anybody taking the time to financially qualify you for that move? And if they say, no, not yet, then you try and set them up with a third party. Now, we use Caitlin, of course, from 21st Century. Whoever you're using, if it's Caitlin or somebody else, or Paul or somebody else, have that person call them back and start pre-qualifying them. And one of the first things that lender is going to say to them is, oh, you're so lucky you're working with Lisa. Oh, you're so lucky you're working with Kathy or Tim. They're the best. And that gives a third-party endorsement before you ever get there. And then finally, is there anything about the home you'd like me to research before we meet? Again, what am I communicating? I'm communicating that I'm already working. Don't use the pre-listing call to interrogate them. Use it to make the appointment better. Now, I love sending some form of a short meeting game plan before I arrive. And this doesn't have to be fancy. Before you get there, again, we're trying to communicate with them more than just when we get there. So you can send them an email, you can send them a text, whatever works for the client. You can send something as simple as, hey, there's no homework required. I'm going to bring all the market information. But when we get together, I'd first like to learn about your plans, walk through the home with you, discuss what buyers are likely to value, and show you the strategy I'd recommend. And that accomplishes a few things. First, it removes pressure. They don't need to prepare anything. Second, it establishes an agenda. And I'm going to do this more than once. I've already told them we're going to talk about their plans before we talk about their recommendations. And third, it signals to them preparation. Now, I talk a lot about Chris Voss. If you haven't read Chris Voss's book, it has nothing to do with real estate. He was the head of the hostage rescue team for the FBI, and just brilliant in the way he talks about negotiation, the way he talks, and he's on lots and lots of videos on YouTube, how he talks about negotiation, how he talks about strategy for dealing with people. Just a spectacular guy to listen to if you get a chance. But it creates a signal that I'm bringing the work. And fourth, it earns permission down here at the bottom. They already know that I'm going to ask questions and tour the property before presenting value and strategy. And this matters because we're doing something psychologically. When I arrive, I'm going to say, I'd love to begin by understanding what you're trying to accomplish. Now it's not a surprise. They've agreed to it. I've already begun controlling the sequence without ever making them feel controlled. And that's what this entire controlled selling method is really about. And that no homework required is an underrated phrase. It works especially well with home sellers. Actually, I shouldn't say especially well. It works with everybody. College students, home sellers, most adults. The next question is, how much can we demonstrate that we've already been working before we've ever been hired? And that's where preparation starts getting very specific. Now, we're going to take this win before you arrive one step further. I want the seller to feel like we've already started working on their home before they've hired them. Not because I want to overwhelm them with a 72-page pack they never asked for. I just want to communicate one thing, that I took this listing appointment seriously. That means I've pulled the tax record, I've looked at the property history, I've checked the prior MLS listings. By the way, always look back and see the last time it was sold and pull the MLS listing. I want to know what the competition is. That's part of my CMA. I've reviewed recent neighborhood sales, not just buy levels in the township, but anything sold in that neighborhood. I've looked at school and location information where it's relevant. If I know about improvements, I've looked into those. I've a working idea of who the likely buyer might be. I understand the recent days on market patterns. How long is it taking to sell an average house in the area? And I've got some awareness of the current financing environment. So the important distinction is the goal is not volume. The seller doesn't need you to dump everything you found onto the kitchen table. That's not preparation, that's evidence disposal. The research is so that your questions are better, your observations are sharper, and your confidence is real. When you get there, you need to be confident. If I already know that 3 similar homes sold in the neighborhood in the last 6 months, I don't need to announce all 3 immediately. But when the seller says homes in here always sell immediately, I can respond with, you're right. And this neighborhood's been moving really well. 3 most recent comparable properties were on the market 8, 13, and 19 days. Now, I'm not guessing. Preparation should show up in the conversation, not merely in the size of the folder that you bring along. So know the home before you see it. And this is about specificity. Generic statements sound like we sound like everybody else. Specific statements sound like we did our homework. So I can compare you're close to shopping with you're about 8 minutes from the main shopping quarter, right? I can change instead of saying this is a popular neighborhood, I can say, there have been 17 sales here in the last 24 months. That's a little bit of specificity, and it changes the way the seller perceives you. You're no longer just an agent looking around the house and saying nice kitchen. You sound like somebody who understands the location and the market. And be careful here. You don't need to turn into Rain Man. You don't need to arrive saying your house is precisely 4.73 miles from Wegmans and your lot contains 18,426 square feet. That becomes a different kind of problem. Pick the facts that actually matter. And specificity signals care because specificity requires effort. So let's get to level 1. We did our pre-listing call. Now we're going to get to the place where we actually meet with them. And that level 1 is comfort, care, and connection. These are the next 3 steps. And this level earns us permission to ask deeper questions. The seller's really asking, Do I like and trust this person enough to talk openly? That question is more important than most agents realize. Again, I give you the story of South Allentown, where this couple pretended they were still together so it didn't influence the price. Because until the seller feels comfortable, you're often getting the surface version of the story. We're thinking about moving. We might downsize. We just want to know what the house is worth. They may all be true, but the deeper version might be we already found another home, or my job starts in another state in 6 weeks, or we need to net a certain amount, or my spouse doesn't really want to move, or we tried this with another agent 2 years ago and it was a complete disaster. You don't get those answers because your listing packet is prettier. You get them because the seller feels safe enough around you to tell you that. Level one is not small talk, it's the foundation of discovery. And yes, you can still talk about the dog, but just remember the dog is not actually one of the 9 C's. So the first C is comfort. And that level of comfort comes before competence. This sounds simple, but it's foundational. An uncomfortable agent can't make a seller feel comfortable. Before they evaluate your market analysis, your CMA, they're evaluating your presence, your energy, your body language, your pace, your confidence, your eye contact, your demeanor, and whether you actually listen. And I'm going to go through some active listening skills in a couple of minutes. But you have to feel comfortable yourself. And many of us have trouble with this. And this is one of the reasons I recommend over and over and over again doing role playing of a listing presentation with your biggest critic, your spouse, with your kids, with anybody you can. Practice, drill, and rehearse it. Go through it over and over again because it takes 63 to 65 times to build a neural pathway in your brain. You've got to do it a lot. And by the way, sellers are extremely good at detecting nervousness and desperation. You may think you're hiding it, but you're not. If you're talking too fast or over explaining everything or laughing nervously at things that weren't remotely funny and agreeing with every statement they make, it communicates something. The first objective here is safety, not a signed agreement. That's a huge mindset shift. If my internal objective is I have to get this listing tonight because I have to pay my bills, I behave differently. But if my objective is I need to understand these people well enough to determine if and how I can help them, now I'm calmer, and calm is contagious. If you appear more nervous than the seller, they may begin wondering whether they should be reassuring you, and that's not the ideal presentation. I really like this idea: rookie hunger, veteran confidence. Care deeply about winning. Prepare like you've never won a listing in your life, but walk in with the calm certainty of somebody who's done this 1,000 times. Those two things can coexist. What you don't want is desperation, because desperation walks into the room before you do. The commission can motivate you. It should not control you. Think about the difference between these two internal conversations. Agent one is thinking, this is a $15,000 commission that I really need. And agent two is thinking, I'm going to understand what they're trying to accomplish and give them the best advice I can. Which agent is going to sound more confident? And that's usually the second one. We want the listing, but we don't need the listing. That's hard for some of us to swallow. The seller doesn't need to feel the commission check physically vibrating in your pocket. And one reason we need that calm confidence is because the seller may already be carrying a surprising amount of anxiety based on this move. We need to reduce that seller anxiety. It's going to help everything else flow better. And in the training I usually do, I talk about taking the seller out on a safe island and explaining what you're going to be doing tonight. That's all about reducing that seller anxiety. But think about what may actually be going through the seller's head. They're thinking, what's my house really worth? What do I need to fix before I put it on the market? Where am I going to go next? Can I afford that next house? What happens if this house doesn't sell? Are strangers going to be walking through my home? Are they going to be opening my jewelry box, going through my drawers? What if I choose the wrong agent? What if we price too low? What if we overprice it? How much is all this going to cost? And that's a lot that's happening internally while we're thinking, great, now let me show you my 27-step marketing plan. You're not ready for that yet. Our first job is not to answer every question immediately. Our first job is to make it safe for them to ask questions. Now, in my regular training, I give you, I think it's 10 or 12 questions that we've been putting in listing packages, at least in Allentown and Bethlehem, that you pull out and you ask them the questions, write down the answers. And the reason you do that is to get them to feel more comfortable and show them that you care and build that connection. But what I've taught people for years is when you ask a question, they say, what do you think my house is worth? Don't answer it. When they ask questions of you, when you're talking to them in the beginning, don't answer those questions. You're going to have to deflect. because we're going to come back to that when we you lose control. We're going to come back to that when we actually get to our presentation. So again, don't answer every question immediately. Our first job is to make them feel safe. So a seller might say, I'm worried about selling before we have someplace else to go. The inexperienced agent says, don't worry, we can make settlement contingent and then do a lease back and maybe find you something off market. And slow down. Don't solve their problems in the first 4 seconds. You can simply say that makes complete sense. It sounds like the timing of the next move is one of your biggest concerns. Now they feel heard and they're going to expand on it. Let me go through that again. I'm really worried about selling before we have someplace else to go. The response is, that makes complete sense. It sounds like the timing of the next move is one of your biggest concerns. And stop and listen. Comfort is created when the seller realizes that they can talk about problems before you try and fix them. And this slide is really reinforcing that same concept. Most seller anxiety is uncertainty. They don't know the value. They don't know what needs to be fixed. They don't know where they're going. They have a lot of fears. And we often think authority means immediately having every answer. It doesn't. Sometimes authority sounds like that's an important concern, but we'll build a strategy around it. Or, before I recommend anything, I'd like to understand a little bit more about why timing matters. That's more reassuring than pretending there's a one-size-fits-all solution. Now, notice what we're doing here. We're not selling it. We're reducing uncertainty. And that's one of the most valuable things a professional can do. A seller has enough anxiety already. We don't need to contribute by opening the laptop and saying, okay, now we've got 68 slides to go through. That sentence has ended several friendships. So how do we start the appointment without immediately creating sales pressure? And this is one of the simplest scripts in the presentation. I do think it's incredibly useful. You begin with, it's on the screen, before we talk about pricing or marketing, I'd really like to understand what you're hoping to accomplish and what an ideal move would look like. Before we start talking about pricing or marketing, I'd really like to understand what you're hoping to accomplish and what an ideal move would look like. Think about what that message sends. This isn't about me. I'm not rushing. We're not starting with commission. We're not starting with you, what I think your house is worth. We're starting with you. And psychologically, that lowers the pressure. Pressure down, discovery up. Let me give you an alternative version I also like. Before we get into the numbers, can you tell me a little bit about what's causing you to think about moving? Again, very natural, very conversational. The opening should make the seller feel like they've entered into a conversation, not a presentation. And once they're comfortable, we can move into the second C, which is care, because care is demonstrated, not declared. That's an important distinction. Care isn't something you announce. Nobody believes you care just because you say, I really care about my clients. Well, hopefully you do. But that sentence proves nothing. Care is demonstrated through your behavior, and part of that is, were you on time? Were you prepared? Do you respect their home? By the way, always offer to take your shoes off when you come to the front door. I hate doing that with a passion, but I offer. Do you respect their time? Are you actually curious about their situation? And are you listening, or are you just waiting for them to stop talking so you can talk? Do you follow through on small commitments? For example, if you tell them, I'll email you that information tonight, and then you email it 3 days later, that tells them something. Small commitments matter. Because the seller is unconsciously saying, if this person doesn't follow through now, what happens after I sign the listing? Care is not a statement, care is evidence. No agent biography ever said, Lauren provides adequate service when it's convenient to him. Everybody claims to care. The difference is whether the seller can see it. And one of the biggest opportunities to demonstrate care happens during the tour of the house. And this is a huge one. When you walk through the property of the seller, you are not a home inspector. The purpose of the tour is to discover, what do they love about the house? What improvements have they made? What features should buyers know about? And what stories are connected to the house? And that may help to create buyer appeal. Yes, you should notice potential objections. You should notice condition. But that doesn't mean you have to become Captain Defect Finder 15 minutes into a relationship. The seller might say, we remodeled this kitchen only 5 years ago. And the agent may respond, yeah, the buyers probably won't like those cabinets though. Wonderful. We've now successfully insulted their kitchen. What's next? You know, talk about their kids? The better approach instead is, tell me what you've changed. What made you choose this layout? What do you like most about it? Now I'm hearing what mattered to them and possibly what will matter to the next buyer. And here's an important distinction. There is a time to discuss preparation. There is a time to say, this room may need paint. We're going to do that later. There's going to be a time when we say we probably need to address the carpet, or that repair may affect buyer perception. But this makes an important point. That belongs later when we're consulting with them after we've earned the standing to make the recommendation. We've got to earn that trust first. During the tour, learn about the home before you critique the home. And while you're walking through the home, there's one simple question that you can use to create connection and uncover the possible story. You come to something like the kitchen or whatever has been done in the house, and you say, whose idea was that? Actually, you know what? I have put in another slide I'll mention here for a second before I get back to whose idea is that, because it is a good tool. I don't know if anybody wants to throw out something, but this is a typical kitchen from the 1980s, 1990s. I could ask, what is wrong with it? And there are problems with this kitchen. And, you know, it's fine. It's got probably Corian countertop. It's got stainless steel appliances, which people are shying away from now. But young people watch HGTV, right? And right now, wood grain cabinets are out. Soffits up here are out. Young people don't want anything above the cabinets. They want it open. Young people want white cabinets or gray or blue cabinets. They don't want wood grain cabinets. Now, the way I approach this, and by the way, going through the house and touring it, again, I'm not going to point that out. When we get back around to pricing and we get back around to where we're going to give them advice, then we can talk about it. But part of what we're talking about here is, yeah, your cabinets are lovely. I really do like the wood grain. You know, it's funny. It's unfortunate, but young people these days, you know what kitchens they like? And they'll usually answer you because they know the answer. White cabinets. Yeah, they do. You know, the funny thing is you can make white cabinets cheaper than you can make wood cabinets. And I hate to see it. A lot of these young people come in and they paint the cabinets white because they can't stand this. And it's killing me. Now I'm commiserating with them. Does that make sense? So I'm telling them that this is a problem, but I disagree with the problem. You know, in 5 years, probably we're going to be back to wood grain. But at the moment, that's what young people like. And, you know, the funny thing is everybody's watching HGTV. They hate this space not being open above cabinets. I don't know why. The other one I'll just mention because I get a kick out of it. If you've ever tried telling a client, wow, wood paneling, that's a little dated, or that's out of style, or young people don't like it. The first thing almost all of them say is the same. Somebody's laughing. The first thing almost all of them say is, but this isn't that cheap paneling from Home Depot. This is the good paneling. There is no good paneling. It just doesn't exist, but it's what people think. So again, don't point that out when you're walking through. Come back around to that when you're talking about how to structure your value of the property. Now, whose idea was that? This is on the tour of the house. One simple little question that can do several things at once. The seller might say, we added a deck 6 years ago. We added a screen porch 6 years ago. And instead of immediately evaluating it, say, oh, really? That's nice. Whose idea was that? Maybe the husband points to his wife. Now I can say, I can turn to her and say, that was a great decision. Buyers are going to love this space. Now, what just happened? I affirmed something that they're proud of. I gave one spouse credit in front of the other spouse. And I learned part of the story of the house. That may sound small, but those little moments build rapport. Let me expand on that idea. You can use this on anything. Who chose the landscaping? Whose idea was it for the built-in cabinetry? Who decided to finish the basement? And sometimes you'll discover something really useful. Maybe they designed the deck specifically for entertaining. Maybe the wife wanted the laundry upstairs because she was tired of hauling baskets. Maybe the husband added a workshop because he restores motorcycles. Now all those features have a story, not just a line in the MLS. Now, of course, use your judgment. You know, if you're standing in front of a regrettable purple bathroom for 1997, and you say, whose idea was that? It may produce a very different level of connection. The home tour is not just about the features, it's about discovering the story behind the features. Now, these are some of my favorite questions during the whole appointment because they help you understand both the seller and the marketing. You can ask, what initially made you choose this home? That tells you what attracted them. Then you might ask, what's your favorite part of the house? That tells you what they value today. Which improvements have you enjoyed the most? And you can write all these down. You can have them on a printed sheet of paper, by the way, when you walk in your listing folder. What improvements did you enjoy the most? Now I'm learning which updates actually affected the way they live. What do neighbors love about living here? You can uncover things that we'll never find in public data. And I do love this one. What do you think you'll miss most when you leave? That question's emotional, but it's also incredibly useful. They may say sitting on the porch in the morning or walking to the park. Oh, crap. I didn't realize there was a park down the street. Anyway, walking to the park, watching the sunset from the deck. Those are all marketing insights. And maybe the best marketing question on the slide is, what should buyers understand that the photos might not show them? Great question, because photos can show the kitchen, but they can't necessarily show that every neighbor comes out on Friday nights. They can show the yard, but that may not communicate that you can hear absolutely nothing from the road. They can show the porch, but that does not show it gets the best sunset in the neighborhood. And sometimes the seller gives you the best marketing copy you'll ever write. You just have to ask for it. And once sellers feel that we genuinely care about their story, we earn something deeper, which is our connection. And connection comes after comfort and care. And the sequence matters. We can't fake connection. And I think agents sometimes try. You walk into the garage and see golf clubs. You say, oh, you golf? I golf too. Wonderful. We've now established that two adults own golf clubs. That's not necessarily a relationship. And the slide says it perfectly. I saw golf clubs. I golf too is not a strategy. It's a sentence. Real connection means the seller feels that they're heard, they're understood, and they're safe. Safe enough to tell you what actually matters. And that comes from everything we've done before now. We didn't rush, we prepared, we asked questions, we cared about the home, and we listened. Connection does not necessarily mean that they think you're their new best friend. You do not have to become socially inseparable, but it means they trust the relationship enough to be honest. If you leave the appointment before being invited to Thanksgiving dinner, that's terrific. But I'd still prefer a signed listing agreement. And one of the best ways to build connection is communicate at the client's pace, not ours. Not every seller wants to communicate in the same way. And one of the biggest mistakes agents make is giving the exact same presentation to everybody. Now we have a whole video that I did on this, laying out different styles of communication, but you may have an analytical seller and you can figure this out pretty quickly. They want data, they want assumptions, they want proof. If you tell them, trust me, I've been doing this for 20 years, that's probably not going to satisfy them. You got to show them the numbers, and then you have that rational seller. The rational seller wants communication, conversation. They want the story. They want to know how you're going to take care of them. If you walk in and immediately hand them 12 spreadsheets, you're going to lose them. There's also what we call a decisive seller. They want a conclusion. Well, what do you recommend? They want that up front. Don't spend 40 minutes explaining something they understood before. You also have the nervous seller, the cautious seller who wants detail, they want timing, and they want risk reduction. They need to, they need to know what happens if something goes wrong. The best communicator isn't the person with the best script. It's the person who can adapt the script to the person sitting across the table from them. If the seller asks one question, you answer for 17 minutes uninterrupted, at some point, you're no longer being thorough, you're taking hostages. And matching their pace includes more than just how much information you give them. We talk about mirroring as a technique. Mirroring doesn't mean imitation. And please don't start copying the seller's hand gestures like you're playing charades. It means adapting speed, how fast they're talking, volume, how loud they're talking, level of detail, formality, and energy. And every so often, somebody's trying to mirror a client and they start mimicking their accent. Please don't do that. If the seller's quiet and thoughtful, I'd probably not walk in at 110 miles an hour. If the seller is very direct, I don't need to bury every answer under 6 paragraphs of warm-up. Adapt, not be artificial. And then we had another powerful tool, and this is from Chris Voss. We call it labeling. It's parroting back what they say in a form of a question. For example, it sounds like you're concerned about selling before you have somewhere to go. That's going to give us a lot more information, and it's going to build a much deeper connection with them. You might say, it seems like you're worried about pricing too low and leaving money on the table. You might say, it sounds like you had a difficult experience with the agent before. And then pause, because they're going to answer that question, and it's going to give you a lot of insight into how you're going to actually present your findings. Or it seems like minimizing disruption to your kids is really important to you. Labels work. A label doesn't solve the problem. It proves that you heard the problem. And that distinction is huge. Most sellers are expecting to defend their concern. When I calmly articulate it for them, they relax. You don't have to solve every concern immediately. Sometimes you first have to prove that you understand it. So I'm going to look at a few examples, I think, on the next slide. But you can practice this technique, by the way, with family members, with friends, around a table with people in the office. Two parts here: mirroring what they do, fast or slow, level of abstraction. And the second one is parroting back with a question. It seems like you're worried about pricing too low and leaving money on the table. This is something you got to practice. Now, here are the three concerns we most often hear: timing, price, and past experience. Timing is, it sounds like selling before you know where you're going is a big concern. Notice that I'm not saying, don't worry about it, we'll find you another house. That phrase is almost never reassuring. If somebody says, don't worry, I immediately assume I should probably begin worrying. Price. It seems like you're concerned about pricing too low and leaving money on the table. Again, I'm not agreeing the house is worth 900,000. I'm acknowledging their fear. Acknowledge first, we're going to talk about price later. And past experience. It sounds like you may have had a frustrating experience with an agent before. And then stop talking. Let them explain. This is important. Don't turn the label into a 3-minute speech. Say it and give them space. Silence is not a system malfunction. Real estate agents are famously uncomfortable with silence. Give us 4 quiet seconds and we'll fill it with price reduction, commission discount, and a personal story that nobody asked us for. And one of the moments where this discipline becomes incredibly important is when the seller asks a question every agent knows is coming. And we know it. You're 15 minutes into the appointment. Maybe you're still walking through the house. You've only just made it past the first floor, and the seller says, so, what do you think it's worth? Every molecule in your real estate body wants to answer, because this is our moment. We've got the comps, we've got the numbers, we've got our opinion. But before we answer, we need to understand why they're asking. So instead of saying it's worth $397,472, I want to say that's obviously one of the big things we're going to cover. Can I ask you what made you ask that question right now? What do you think my home is worth? That's obviously one of the big things we're going to cover in a few minutes when we sit down. But can I ask what made you ask that question now? What might be behind that question? Well, Zillow says it's worth $750,000 or $650,000. The neighbor said, or the neighbor's house sold for $700,000. Another agent told him it's worth $7.25 all day long. They need $680,000 to be able to afford the next house, at least in their minds. And when they refinanced it, they had an appraisal done, and that appraiser claimed it was worth $750. Or maybe they're just testing us. Same question, 6 completely different meanings. So understand the question before you answer the question. And there's another reason not to answer instantly. The moment I jump into valuation, I may have allowed the seller to change the entire sequence of the appointment. Now I'm going to come to control in a minute. But we're talking about price before I understand their motivation, their net requirements, their timing, their decision making. And Zillow's number may, of course, have arrived through a highly sophisticated valuation technique known as the internet says so. And this is where we move from connection into level 2. Now we've built that foundation. We've built that comfort, care, and connection. If these aren't solid, everything up here becomes unstable. The next section we're going to get into is control, clarify, and crystallize. This is the level that earns trust. By the end of level 1, the seller should feel I'm comfortable with this person. By the end of level 2, I want them thinking, this person really understands what I'm trying to accomplish. That's a much higher level of trust. And notice what still hasn't happened. We have not done the formal presentation yet. No big marketing pitch, no final pricing recommendation, no commission defense. We're still diagnosing. And this doesn't have to take forever, by the way. My typical listing appointment is about 90 to 120 minutes. But you have to build that connection before you take the next step. We're diagnosing this point. So level 1 creates a relationship. Level 2 is going to give us the strategy that we're going to use to close the transaction. The first C's in level 2 are probably the most misunderstood word in the entire process, which is control. When people hear the word control, some of them freak out. They think we're manipulating somebody. That is not what we mean. Control is leadership and structure and sequence. If you don't provide structure, the seller's anxiety will provide structure. Control means the 5 things I've got in the middle here: direction, the sequence of events, the agenda we're going to follow, the purpose we're moving toward in the next step. Without control, the meeting goes something like this. The seller says, what do you charge? And we try and justify our fee. Then the seller says, what do you think my house is worth? And then we answer that one. And then they say, where are you going to advertise it? Are you going to get it on the internet? And 40 minutes later, you've answered every question they've asked, but you still don't know why they're moving. And you've become a human FAQ page. With control, with structure, the appointment moves through discovery, diagnosis, and recommendation in that order. Control is not making a seller follow your agenda. It's creating an agenda that helps the seller to make a better decision. And that better decision is hopefully hiring you. If no one is driving the appointment, eventually the discussion winds up in a ditch somewhere between commission and Zillow. In a regular listing training, I call this taking the client out on a safe island by explaining what you're going to do tonight during the meeting and then laying out that structure. Now, one of the simplest ways to establish control in a residential listing appointment is to establish a home base, and that's taking them to the kitchen table. I love this tactic because it's simple and incredibly powerful. When you first arrive, identify where you're going to come back to after touring. And maybe it's a kitchen table, maybe it's a dining room table, whichever makes sense. You're not taking them to the living room because strangers sit with strangers in the living room, and you can't show them anything across the coffee table. The table becomes your home base. And before you move, explain the sequence. I would love to spend a few minutes understanding your plans, then walk through the house with you, then come back here to the kitchen table or dining room table, whatever, and talk about value and strategies. Does that work? Almost everybody's going to say yes. And think about what just happened. We established that first we're going to talk, then we're going to tour, then we're going to come back here, and then we're going to discuss value and strategy. So when they ask about price in the upstairs hallway, I can naturally say, absolutely, we're going to get to that when we get back to the table. Let me ask you about this room first. I'm not avoiding it's deflecting, but I'm not avoiding their question. I'm maintaining the sequence that we already agreed to. And there's another subtle reason I like the idea of the home base. A home tour can become uncontrolled very quickly. You start in the kitchen, then you're looking at the basement, then the seller finds an old appraisal, then somebody gets something to drink, and then the dog needs to go outside, and then suddenly you're standing in the garage discussing commission. Home base gives you the anchor of the appointment. Set the process out loud, get permission, and then lead. And the beauty is that you're not controlling them, you're leading them with their permission. So the next slide, we're going to reinforce the exact language and move into one of the core principles of, I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. I'll come back to it. Again, this slide reinforces the idea of home base. Before we ever start wandering through bedrooms, basements, and closets, I want to establish the structure of the appointment up front. Now, what I use to say in the middle here is, I'd love to spend a few minutes understanding your plans, then walk through the house with you, then come back here to talk about value and strategy. Does that work? That's the same thing I told you earlier a couple of minutes ago, but I'm saying it again. I'm repeating myself because I think it's really powerful. That last part matters, and it works. You're not imposing a process. You're getting permission to leave. And when they agree, they've also agreed without really thinking about it. The price and strategy come after discovery and after the tour, and that becomes very useful later. If they ask in the hallway, halfway through the upstairs, what do you think we should list for? Again, you can say, absolutely, we're going to dig into that when we get back to the table. I just want to finish understanding the house first. Again, you're not dodging the question. You're following the process they agreed to. And this also avoids the strange phenomenon where a listing appointment ends with everybody standing in the garage, again, staying next to the lawnmower discussing commission. Leadership feels natural when the client has agreed to the route. And this is one of the core ideas of control selling. If the seller asks every question, whose agenda are we following? We're following theirs. And they're going to ask, what do you charge? What's the house worth? How long is it going to take to sell? Where do you advertise? And do you already have buyers? Are those the questions we hear all the time? And if I answer each question in the order it's asked, I may be controlling that appointment. And there's a real important distinction. That doesn't mean we ignore their questions. It means we organize them. We're going to answer those eventually. Absolutely, we'll cover all that. But before I answer that, can I understand a little bit more about what you're hoping to accomplish? Now, I'm respecting the question, but maintaining the process. And notice the second half of this slide. Whenever we ask the client for something, attach a rationale. Instead of saying, hey, let's walk through the house, let's tour the house. You might say, I'd like to walk through the house so that I can identify the features we should emphasize to buyers. Use that so that constantly. Completely different feel. The person asking the questions tends to control the direction. The person asking the best questions earns the right to lead. Now, I'm going to get back to this so that concept. Why are we doing it this way? Because a request without a reason can sound intrusive. A request without a reason a request with a reason sounds more collaborative. So again, the home tour, walking through the house. I'd like to walk through the house so that I can identify the features we should emphasize to buyers. Net proceeds. I'd like to understand what you owe so that we can estimate your likely net proceeds. Okay. Decision makers. I'd like to know who else is involved in the sale so that nobody is surprised later. And that phrase explains the benefit. It answers the client's silent question, why do you need to know that? And it keeps the tone consultative rather than interrogating you, if that's the right word. Without that rationale, asking how much do I owe on the house, let me say it a different way. If I say, how much do you owe on the house? It might sound less like real estate and might more like an aggressive first date. A request tells them what you want. A rationale tells them why it helps them. And once we have control of the situation, the structure, we can finally get to clarifying what they need. And C5 is clarifying. This is where a lot of listing appointments go wrong. Agents think clarify means ask what they want for the house. That's true, but it's only a small part of it. There are really three dimensions to this sale: their problem, the price, and the process. The problem is, why are they moving? Why now? What happens if nothing changes? And that, if nothing changes, can be very powerful to get them to talk to you a little bit deeper. Price is, what do they hope for? What do they actually need? And what does the market actually support? Because those are often different things. And the process is, who makes the decision on selling? Who else is involved? Are there other agents being interviewed? And what could stop this move from going forward? And I love the line at the bottom of this line: most listing appointments never leave price. And that's exactly why they turn into a debate about a number. If all you understand is the number, you don't understand the assignment. So let me start with the problem. Three very simple questions. Why are you considering moving? And again, you can have these written on a piece of paper. And then you ask, why now? And then the big one, what happens to your plans if the house doesn't sell? What happens if you don't move? These questions get progressively deeper. And the first answer might be, we need more space. Okay, don't stop there. Tell me about that. Maybe they've had another child. Maybe both spouses now work from home since COVID. Maybe an aging parent is moving in. Maybe they're fighting over the home office. And this slide says it beautifully. The first answer is to label. The second answer is reason. Again, label is parroting it back and turning that into a question to get some confirmation. And why now matters. People can dislike a house for 5 years and do nothing about it. But something changes. They have a new baby. They have a new job. They have a retirement date. They're getting a divorce. There's a financial problem. There's a school decision. A health issue comes up. A new opportunity comes up. The change is often the real motivation. We need more space is sometimes code for, if one more person leaves something on the kitchen island, there's going to be consequences. Don't just identify the stated reason for moving. Find the event to turn that move into an action. And this may be one of the most powerful questions of the whole appointment. If everything worked perfectly, what would the ideal situation look like? And let them paint the picture. Maybe it's sell first and then buy. I was at one the other day where they're going to move in with relatives until they find the right property. They realize selling is going to come first. Some of them want to find the right house first. They buy first. Some want to close both transactions simultaneously. Some want to stay through the end of the school year or rent it back for 60 days or avoid showings at certain times because of their sleep schedules. Or maybe they have to hit a minimum net or move by a particular date because of a job relocation or something. Why all this matters, this is where the seller begins designing the process for us. And now I can stop giving generic advice. If they tell me that our biggest fear is being homeless between homes, my listing strategy has to address that sequencing. If they say we need to be in Florida by October 1st, then timing matters differently. If they say we don't want showings while our toddler is sleeping, then let's design around it. Design the plan around their reality, not around your standard listing checklist. Because ideal situation almost never includes, we'd love 37 showings over 11 days and possibly 2 deals that fall apart. Once we understand that, we can talk about price. And this slide is important when sellers say, what's my house worth? There are actually several different numbers floating around here. It's what they hope it's worth, and part of that's emotion. Part of that is the neighbor saying they got what they want, and they probably didn't. Part of it's what Zillow says, and part of it's what somebody at the backyard barbecue told them it was worth. The second number is what they actually need, the number that the next move requires. The third one is what really matters overall, which is what the market supports. What are comparable buyers actually paying? We also need to know what we're going to ask, the invitation we're going to publish. What is our likely selling price? What's the market, what the price the market can ultimately produce? And the net proceeds, what actually lands in their account at closing. So a weaker versus a stronger question. What do you want to list for? That's a weak question. The stronger question is there a number you need to net for the move to work? That distinction is huge. List price is a marketing decision. Net proceeds may be the seller's real life decision. So if they need $200,000 net for the next down payment, understand, I understand something far more important than whether they like to list it for $699.9. Well, my neighbor got 700,000. That's not technically an appraisal methodology, although it remains widely popular. The seller talks about price, the advisor uncovers the economics. And then we clarify the process. This is where we prevent surprises after we've delivered the greatest listing presentation of our lives. How will you make the decision about which agent to hire? That's a completely fair question to ask. And it often brings them in our direction. And then, are you meeting with other agents? Again, why be afraid to ask that question? And then, who else needs to participate in this decision? Is there anything that would prevent you from moving forward? And how quickly would you like to begin? That's all useful information. If they're interviewing 3 more agents over the next 5 days, I want to know that. If dad actually owns the house, but the adult children are making the decision, I need to know that too. If they can't move until a job offer is finalized, I need to know that. And if one spouse really isn't committed to selling, hopefully I can discover that at this point. The worst possible outcome is we love everything you showed us. We just need to talk to our cousin in Arizona because technically she owns half the house. Good to know. Perhaps earlier would have been ideal. Clarify how the decision gets made before asking them how to make it. And this question can feel uncomfortable, but it's also very important. What happens if the house doesn't sell? By the way, everybody thinks they've got the best house in the world and they all think it's going to sell, right? So this makes them think maybe I have to be more realistic on price rather than shooting for a sky-high number. What happens if the house doesn't sell? And notice what we're doing. We're not creating fake urgency. We're helping the seller to think through the consequences of doing nothing. Possible consequences are they lose the next property. They carry 2 homes. There's a delay in when they move. They extend a painful commute. They delay that retirement, or they miss school year timing that we're trying to preserve. So we want to explain it carefully. We're not pressuring it. The slide says it exactly right. It's an intellectual engagement with why solving the problem matters. Because if nothing meaningful happens, if the house doesn't sell, we need to know that too. Maybe they just want to test the market. That affects how committed they are to the pricing, how committed they are to properly preparing the house and making decisions. If they tell me if the house doesn't sell, we'll just stay here a couple more years. That's useful information. The seller may have very different level of flexibility than somebody who begins a job 400 miles away in 6 weeks. And if the answer is nothing happens, we're perfectly happy here, we've discovered that our greatest competitor may actually be their own house. Urgency should come from the client's reality, not from our need for a listing. Once we've clarified all that, we have a lot of information. Next comes the step that organizes it. And that's the 6th step, which is crystallize. Crystallize is where we take everything we've heard and we organize it back for the seller. So I start with, let me make sure I understand what you've told me. And I repeat back to them their priorities and their language, not mine. So for example, so your ideal outcome is get the home sold by early June so you can move in before the next school year. And they're going to agree or disagree. Did I get that right? You might say you'd rather not purchase until this home's under agreement. Or you need roughly 180,000 net proceeds for the next purchase. Or you want to maximize price, but you want to spend 40,000 renovating before the listing. And then finish with, did I get that right? And explain why this little summary locks it in. We want to figure out timing, sequence, their net requirements. We want to figure out their trade-offs. And something important happens to them psychologically. The seller realizes that we understand them, not just understand the house, but we understand them. And now every recommendation I make has something to attach to. If later I recommend against a $40,000 kitchen renovation, it connects to their stated objective. If I recommend a certain pricing strategy, it connects to their timing. If I recommend delaying the purchase until the house is under agreement, that was their stated comfort level. My presentation is no longer generic. It's a response to what they told me. This is also your chance to find out whether you've completely misunderstood the last 40 minutes before you confidently recommend the wrong strategy. Clarify gathers the pieces, and crystallize proves you understand their picture. And now we're going to shorten that crystallization into one clear statement, establish a priority order, and get agreement on what actually this looks like. Only after that can we get into the consulting, C7, which is what I began with today. And that's where the listing presentation finally begins. This is our final checkpoint before we move into the presentation. We've asked questions, we've clarified their motivation, we understand timing, we understand their financial requirements, we understand what they do and do not want to do to prepare the property. Now I want to take all of that and put it into a clean statement. So your ideal objective, your ideal outcome is to sell by early June, move before school starts, net about 180,000, avoid major renovations, and minimize disruption to the kids. Did I get all that right? And then I stop because what I want is, yes, exactly. That little answer is powerful. The seller has agreed to my description of their problem. And it means I now have permission to design a solution around it. Now, I did not say, so basically you want the highest price possible, because everybody wants that. That summary would prove I've learned absolutely nothing. If your crystallization could apply equally well to every homeowner in North America, we may have to dig a little deeper. This is the moment the seller stops thinking this agent's got good information and starts thinking this agent really understands our situation and they understand us. But before I recommend anything, I want to know which of those priorities actually wins when they're in conflict. And that's important because sellers want everything. They want the highest price, the fastest sale, no inconvenience, they don't want to do any repairs, no risk, a flexible settlement. And maybe the buyer could also mow the lawn on Saturdays until settlement. But real estate usually involves trade-offs. So we need to establish a hierarchy. Maximum price. That might outrank timing, it might not. Speed. If we can sell faster, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, does that solve any bigger problem? And convenience. Are showings, preparation, or repairs creating enough disruption that convenience actually carries some substantial volume? And certainty. Would you as the seller prefer a cleaner offer with a strong probability of closing over something that might be a little bit higher offer with considerably more risk? So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, imagine two offers. Offer A is $610,000. They've got strong financing, big deposit, minimal contingencies, and a 30-day closing. Offer number two is $615,000 or $620,000. It's only 5% down. It's got a home sale contingency. It's got a long inspection period, and the buyer's current home hasn't even been listed yet. That second offer may even be 6.25. Which is better? Now, you can't just look at that by looking at the price. The answer depends on what we established here. Determine the priorities before the offer arrives, not while everybody's emotionally staring at the highest number. And once we know the priority order, we can do something very powerful before we even present our strategy. Now, here's the transition I want you to practice. I've listened, I've clarified, I've crystallized. And again, I ask, if I can show you a strategy to design to maximize your net, get you moved before school starts, and avoid unnecessary improvements, would that accomplish what you're hoping for? Think about what we just did. We have not shown the strategy yet. We've asked the seller to agree on the criteria by which the strategy should be judged. And that's incredibly powerful, incredibly important, because they're no longer picking an agent based on the highest price the agent gave them. Because now when I recommend pricing and preparation and launch timing or a particular marketing approach, I can connect every recommendation back to something they already told me they wanted. If I tell them I don't recommend spending $35,000 remodeling the kitchen, that isn't just my opinion. I can say, remember, one of the things you told me is that you want to avoid major renovations and still be moved in or out before the school year starts. That's why I'm recommending we focus on some minor paint touch-ups, some staging and presentation instead. Now, the recommendation is anchored to their objective. An agreement on objective makes the agreement on strategy so much easier. And only now, after approximately 42 slides, do we start presenting. Are we even allowed to start presenting? And that takes us up to this roof line, which is consult, close, and confirm. Because we've hopefully made them comfortable. We hopefully now have them like and trust us. And I can't change my slide. We can move to that third tranche. Consult, close, and confirm. And this level earns the listing. But the difference is we're not entering into this phase hoping to persuade them with our great marketing plan of having a video tour and putting it on 2,000 websites. We've already done the hard work. They're comfortable with us. They know that we care. We've connected with them. We've controlled the structure of the presentation. We've clarified what they need, and we've parroted it back to them by crystallizing it. And we've got an agreement on what a successful strategy needs to accomplish. I'm no longer pitching, I'm advising. So those first 6 C's earn the right to recommend level 3, and that turns it into action. So consulting, the big moment, the listing presentation finally begins. And it should not sound like, let me tell you everything my company does. Instead, I want you to say, based on what you told me, here's what I recommend. And that one phrase changes the whole presentation based on what you told me. Now, everything that follows is attached to something the seller said. That means I shouldn't necessarily give the same presentation to every client. If the seller cares deeply about timing, I'm going to emphasize timing. If the biggest concern is net proceeds, I show how pricing and negotiation protect that net. If they're terrified about disruption, I explain showing strategy and preparation differently. And if they're worried about having nowhere to go, I discuss sequencing and settlement options. The physical presentation may be the same deck, but the conversation around it has to be different. Every recommendation should connect back to their stated objectives. And if it doesn't connect, ask yourself whether the seller actually needs to hear it. That may mean abandoning that cherished real estate tradition of explaining every feature our brokerage has ever acquired since 1987. Don't give them your presentation, give them their strategy. So what exactly should that strategy cover? These are the 7 areas. Now, I actually probably going to move these around next time I do this, but first is positioning. What are we actually selling? The house. Second is preparation. What should we do before we launch the listing? Now, third here, I have pricing. I'm actually probably going to move that beyond marketing, but pricing is what pricing strategy supports their objective. And fourth is marketing. How do we reach the right buyer? Once we get through those foundational core subjects, we can talk about showings. How do we create access and momentum without unnecessarily disrupting the seller? Sixth is how we're going to evaluate offers and negotiate price and terms and risk. And finally, what's our closing plan? How do we get from an accepted offer to settlement? Because things go wrong, don't they? And notice that marketing in this case is only number 4. That's important. Agents sometimes act as if the entire listing job consists of marketing. How many websites are you on? Marketing matters tremendously, but first we need to know how we're positioning the property, how we're preparing it, and how we're pricing it. Marketing is part strategy. It's not the entire strategy. The first consultation question is deceptively simple. What exactly are we selling? Technically, we're selling a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath, 2,400 square foot, 2-car garage colonial, right? Those are specifications. Specifications help buyers find the property on websites. They don't necessarily make the buyer want it. By the way, in January, we're going to have some enhancements to the website that are going to allow people to talk in plain English into the website and say, I'm looking for something that's got some water view and maybe 3 or 4 bedrooms, and it'll actually work more effectively to find the properties. We'll be talking about that over the next week. But again, those are specifications. They don't make the buyer want it. What are we really selling? We're selling the experience of living there. Why does somebody want to pay more for this home with similar square footage to a different home? Maybe it's location. Maybe it's a setting. Maybe it's that view from the deck, or how big the acreage is, or the privacy this house has that some of them don't, or the walkability to the park or the nature trail, or the architecture, maybe the renovated kitchen, maybe the space for entertaining for extended family to come over. Maybe it's community. Maybe it's Hemlock Farms. Maybe it's convenience. So for example, if you have an ad that says 4-bedroom colonial with a rear deck, or instead on the screen, a home where the kitchen opens directly onto a covered outdoor entertaining space overlooking 2 private acres, we're talking about the same property, but one's a database entry and the other helps somebody to imagine living there. And that's why all these questions during the tour mattered. What do you love about the house? What will you miss? What are the neighbors like? Those help us create the flyer, the lifestyle story. MLS remarks occasionally read like they were written by somebody being charged by the adjective. Stunning, magnificent, breathtaking, spectacular. I do that too often. At some point, we're no longer marketing a split level from 1977. We're describing the Grand Canyon. Specifications get the home found. Story makes the buyer care. But before we launch that story, we have to determine whether anything about the property should change. And that's where we talk about preparation. And I want to use a very simple rule. We talk about this in the regular listing presentation I give. Don't spend $1 unless it's reasonably expected to return more than that dollar. Okay? When you sell a car, you clean the car out so that it looks better. You hose it off outside, you vacuum the inside. You want to get the highest price you can. Everything we look at, we start with don't spend $1 unless you reasonably expect to return more than $1. It changes the conversation from what could we improve to what should we improve, and that's a huge difference. So we want to look at decluttering and painting or touching up, repairs, landscaping, because that's their first impression when they come up, cleaning the house, staging the house in some cases, Having all the lights on, having some vanilla in a pan cooking to make the house smell inviting or like it's got cookies baking. The furniture, and yes, occasionally major renovations, because sometimes we have to do that. But avoid saying you need to update everything. That's not advice, it's an expensive emotional event. Instead of which improvements are actually going to material affect marketability or price. You might say $2,000 in paint dramatically improves your first impression. Great. Maybe $4,000 in landscaping changes the curb appeal. Great. But maybe spending $45,000 on a new kitchen so a future buyer could decide whether they would have preferred white cabinets to the gray, maybe not. And remember what we learned in Crystalize. If the seller told us they need to move within 8 weeks, if we're going to recommend a 3-month renovation, it's probably not aligned with their objective. We do occasionally recommend renovations with a spectacular return, usually to the next owner. Prepare for the market. Don't remodel for an imaginary buyer. And that raises an important question also. Who is the next buyer? And we need to be thoughtful here. We're not talking about targeting buyers based on protected characteristics. We're talking about property needs and purchase behavior. Who is most likely to value this particular home? A move-up buyer that may be looking for more space or better layout or different school district or convenience or commute. We might be targeting somebody downsizing. They may value condition or ease of ownership or first floor living. A first-time buyer may care enormously about affordability, financing, and certainty. A lifestyle buyer may specifically want acreage or privacy or views or walkability or some particular setting. Then you've got to ask 3 questions. Where did they search? That affects how we're going to market our channels. What matters to them? And that determines our story. If we're going to do a lifestyle buyer, our story matters. What objections are they likely to raise? And that influences what we fix in the house. People downsizing don't want to do work in the house they're buying. So what we fix, explain or address that before the launch. So if a likely buyer for a rural property wants land and privacy, I don't want the entire marketing campaign about conveniently located next to shopping. That may be true, but it may not be what the buyer's buying. The best marketing starts by deciding whose attention we're trying to earn. Everyone is not a target market. It's what agents say when they haven't selected one yet. Once we understand the buyer, we can design that first impression for the buyer. Now we get into media. Professional photography, I know some of you do it, some of you don't. I strongly recommend you have that done, particularly with a house that's exceeding $3,000. It makes such a difference. And by the way, people who are possibly going to list with you are judging you online. Video, you can do this with a selfie stick going through. You can do drone videos where appropriate, or floor plans or 3D tours. We're building unique property websites for each of the listings. And please use social clips. These are all useful tools. But I want you to notice the line at the bottom. The goal is not media. The goal is to get buyer action, and that distinction matters. We're not producing a movie because we want a beautiful movie. We're producing content because we want the right buyer to stop scrolling, pay attention, imagine themselves in the home, click for more information to our website, not Zillow. Always share it from your website, and schedule the showing and write an offer. So when we decide whether to use video or drone or a floor plan, the question isn't, do we offer this? The question is, will this help the buyer understand or desire the property? Sometimes a drone's incredibly important if we're doing a property with acreage or a waterfront property or a property that's got a certain locational relationship or maybe a large estate. But other times, the most exciting aerial footage we can do is produce a bird's eye view of 6 neighboring townhouse rooftops. Probably not worth a cinematic score. So a floor plan may be incredibly valuable when a home's layout is the selling feature. So a 3D tour may help an out-of-area buyer. But short-term video may create awareness. Professional photography is usually the foundation because the buyer's first showing increasingly occurs on the screen. We don't want to market to impress the seller with our media. We market to cause the buyer to act. And now we come to the piece sellers usually expect us to discuss 40 minutes ago, which is pricing. And notice how much better prepared we are for that conversation if we know the seller's goals, their timing, their net requirement, the story about the property. We know what preparation makes sense. Now we can get back to pricing, because pricing is no longer just what number should we put in the MLS. It becomes a strategy. And I think one of the biggest mistakes agents make is treating pricing as though there's only one correct number. There may be one best strategy, but there are several ways to approach it. Now I've got across screen aspirational, market supported, and event-based. Aspirational pricing, that means we intentionally start above perceived market value to test the ceiling. There can be an upside if the right buyer shows up, but it has to be the right buyer. But there's also risk. The home can sit on the market. We may need price reductions. And once buyers start seeing a listing sitting on the market, that conversation changes and often you end up with less. So that is something we can do, but I would call it with the seller aspirational pricing. The second is market supported pricing. It's a range the comparable sales actually support. And usually this gives us the highest probability of selling within a predictable window and getting us useful feedback quickly. And the third is event-based pricing. This is where we deliberately position the home to create buyer competition, the auction effect, under price skip. The goal is not just to attract interest, it's to concentrate interest, that we can produce multiple offers, but only if the property is properly prepared, properly launched, and the seller is disciplined enough to allow the strategy to work. And this is the consultative move. Present all three, recommend one, which is usually going to be market supported. Then tie your recommendation back to their priorities and the seller ranked earlier. If timing is important or certainty is more important than squeezing out absolutely every last theoretical dollar, that may point us in this direction over here. If they have no urgency and a very unusual property, maybe another approach makes sense. Price is not just a number, it's a strategy designed to create a market response. And no, let's start high because we can always come down later is not a pricing strategy. It's more like a prayer, and it usually hurts us more than helps us. And I really like this distinction. A list price is the invitation. The sales price is the result. The seller controls the asking price. The market ultimately controls the outcome. And price affects a lot more than what number appears in the MLS. It controls who sees the property, which buyers engage, perceived value, competition, leverage, and days on market. Let me segue for just a second. You've probably all heard this line when you're at a listing appointment in Eastern Pennsylvania. Well, do you hit New York buyers because they pay more? No, they don't. They have cash. They don't look at one house and pay more for that one house. They look at 15 houses and they buy the one that they think is best for them. That's at the right price. So they're looking at the market as well. It's not that they come in and look at one house. So if we price at $599.9 instead of $629.9, we may expose the home to an entirely different buyer pool. I'm explaining the concept, by the way, to the seller. If we list it at $599.9 instead of $629.9, we may expose the home to an entirely different buyer pool. If we price too aggressively, we may create a perception problem before buyers ever walk through the door. If we price at a level that creates immediate activity, that activity can create leverage for us. So when a seller says, why don't we just start 30,000 higher and see what happens? The answer is not, we can't do that because I said so, or Tim's answer, no. The answer is because the list price controls who engages with the property, how quickly they engage, and how much leverage we have once they do. We're not choosing a price to make the seller feel good on a listing day. We're choosing a price to influence buyer behavior. And the list price does, admittedly, produce one guaranteed result, a very attractive number on a listing agreement. And then we get into marketing. Notice how late marketing appears in the process, and we did that intentionally. Because by now we know who the likely buyer is, what the home story is, how it should be positioned and prepared. And we're using marketing to enhance all of that. And again, we might use all these things that are on the screen, the MLS, syndication, major portals, social media, signage, open houses, direct outreach, which we do, geographic farming, dedicated property website. But every one of those channels has to answer one question. How does that help us reach the probable buyer? And that's our filter. All of it serves the same purpose. All of our marketing serves the same purpose. Create enough emotional and intellectual interest to make the right buyer act. And marketing activity is not the goal. Buyer action is the goal. A seller is rarely helped by knowing that their home received 14,000 impressions if all 14,000 people collectively decided not to schedule a showing. And this is where launch timing matters. We should not simply activate the listing because the photos came back. That's not a strategy, that's clerical efficiency. So let me explain launch for just a second. Use that preparation period intentionally. Get the photographer out. Build awareness when it's appropriate. Coordinate the timing of when it hits the market. Try and get concentrated showings. and set expectations around feedback and think intentionally about how and when offers are going to be handled. So, for example, if we know the seller wants maximum activity during the first weekend, then maybe we prepare everything completely, build the awareness before launch. In other words, a pre-listing campaign, coming soon campaign. Go active at the right time. Maybe that's Tuesday and we have the open house on Sunday. Make the property easier to show and create a clear process for handling offers. That's very different from the photographer emailed me at 3:17 on Tuesday, so we're going to make it active on 3:26. At 3:26. The first few days on the market are often when buyer attention is at its highest. So we're going to use that time deliberately. Launch with intent, not merely because everything's been uploaded. And I like this slide because sellers tend to shop for the thing that they can see most easily, which is marketing. They're already looking on Zillow and centraldomain.com and realtor.com, and they're looking at agents and comparing those agents' photos and videos and websites, and open houses, and social media. That's all important. But that's only one role. Role one is skilled marketer. We create interest. We position the home so the probable buyer sees it, understands it, and wants it. Our second role is as negotiator. We protect the price and terms from the first offer all the way through inspection and appraisal. We are the problem solver. We get the deal to closing when something inevitably always goes sideways. And sellers underestimate these roles. Roles 2 and 3 happen after the listing agreement is signed. And that's exactly why sellers underestimate them. But it's often where most of the money gets won or lost. For example, a beautiful marketing campaign may generate 3 offers. That's great. But which one is actually the strongest? How do we negotiate the price? What about the inspections? What if the appraisal comes in low? What if the buyer's financing starts to get shaky? And that's where professional skill starts becoming very expensive or very valuable. Taking great photos gets the buyer in the door, but keeping the transaction alive after the inspector discovers 47 things is a slightly different skill set. The seller's not hiring a marketer. They're hiring a marketer, a negotiator, and a problem solver. And I want you to communicate that to your sellers. Now, I want to make the invisible visible. I want to make the invisible process visible. The sellers are usually not afraid of work. They're afraid of not knowing what happens next. So I want to draw a path for them. We're going to prepare, launch, negotiate, and close. Prepare, we sign a listing agreement. I'm telling them this up front. We're going to prepare the listing agreement, do the property preparation, whatever that needs to be, some touch-up painting, some moving the carpet around, whatever, photography and video, and build our marketing campaign. Phase 2 is the launch. Go active, have showings, get feedbacks and hopefully offers, or try and look at that feedback to see what we might need to adapt to. Step 3 is negotiation. Offer negotiation, agreement of sale, inspections, and appraisal are all things we've got to deal with, right? And then closing. Mortgage and title, repairs and contingencies, our final walkthrough, and closing and move. Now, when sellers see the full sequence, they stop wondering whether anything is happening. They start seeing what stage they're in, and they know what comes next, and they understand why certain things matter. Uncertainty creates anxiety. A visible process creates confidence. We're making the invisible visible always. It also reduces that Friday night text, just checking in, what's happening with my house? Sometimes the answer is simply exactly what we said would be happening on that timeline. Now comes the question every seller asks, whether they ask it directly or not. Why should I choose you? Now, in my regular listing presentation, I say, why choose Tim Mahan? And we go through the fact that some agents are what we call the numbers gang, and other agents are there to help them make good decisions. Too many agents say I'm the best, or I work harder, or I care more, or I'm a top producer. That's fine. Prove it. Use evidence. Show relevant sales, case studies, marketing examples, some of your reviews, communication systems, negotiation examples, buyer reach. Show some evidence. Instead of saying I'm a great negotiator, say, on this listing, we had 3 offers in 5 days. The highest offer had weak financing and a long inspection contingency. So we negotiated the second highest buyer upward. We improved the terms. That deal closed cleanly. That's evidence. Evidence beats adjectives every time. Everyone says they're the best. I have yet to see an agent bio that says pleasantly average, but available most afternoons. And once the seller understands the strategy and why you're the right person to execute it, we can reach C8, which is the close. And that feels natural, not dramatic, not aggressive, not like we suddenly changed personalities. We've gone through C1 through C7, and the seller already feels comfortable, knows that we care, feels connected, has followed our process, has clarified what they want and has agreed to it in our crystallization stage and understands it, and has heard the strategy that we've built specifically around those priorities. So the close should simply be, does all this make sense? And the answer is almost always yes. Great. Then let's talk about what this looks like to get started. And the close should feel inevitable, not aggressive. We should not need to dim the lights, lean forward, lower your voice, and execute a closing technique from 1987. 4 simple questions I like here. There's trial close, a gap question, a concern question, and the next step. Trial close is, does this strategy address the objectives we discussed? That checks off all the boxes. Is there anything important I haven't covered yet? That's our gap question. That gives them permission to raise something we missed. What concerns would prevent you from moving forward? Now we surface any last-minute real objections. And then finally, the next step. Let me show you what it looks like to get started. Does this strategy address the objectives we discussed? Is there anything important I haven't covered? What concerns would prevent you from moving forward? And let me show you what it looks like to get started. Now, none of these are high pressure. They're just next logical question in a conversation. If C1 through C7 were done properly, sellers already agreed with virtually everything leading up to this point. The close is not a new argument, it's the next sentence. If closing suddenly feels like hand-to-hand combat, something probably went wrong earlier. And then we get to one of everybody's favorite questions. Will you reduce your commission? Our instinct is no. Clarify. So here's a response. That's an absolutely fair question. What specifically concerns you about my fee? By the way, they then have to defend it. And I got to tell you, when I've asked this question, probably a third of the time the seller says, oh, forget it, just I'll sign the papers. Absolutely, that's a fair question. What specifically concerns you about my fee? Because your fee is too high can mean several things. Maybe the total dollars feel large. Maybe another agent quoted less. Maybe the seller's net is coming up short. Maybe they simply don't understand what you're doing, or they simply fear overpaying. That clarification matters. Each one requires a different response. If the concern is what they're netting, that's a mathematical conversation. If another agent quoted less, that's a services and value conversation. We're going to deliver this. If they're afraid of overpaying, that becomes a negotiation value conversation. And if I immediately launch into, let me explain why I'm worth 6.7%, I may be answering the wrong objection. So for example, if a seller says, will you reduce your question? And I say, I'm happy to talk about that. What's specifically driving the concern? And the seller says, honestly, we just need to net another $8,000 for the down payment. Now we're having a different conversation. Never defend the fee until you understand what the fee objection really means. If you hear that another agent is charging less, resist the urge to say, well, you get what you pay for, even if your inner voice is extremely enthusiastic about that sentence. Now we've clarified the commission concern. The next few slides deal with other closing common objections. Let me say one other thing about commission. Actually, I'll probably come back to this. So many of you have different ways of responding to this that are very effective, but it all starts with trying to clarify why they have a problem with it, and that allows you to come back with an answer. One of the best ones that I've used over the years is variations of, I'm going to be negotiating to get you the highest price possible. If I can't even negotiate my commission effectively, how am I going to negotiate another $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on the sale of your house? And that often works very effectively because I understand it. The other 3 common objections, another agent said my house is worth more. This is where agents get defensive. Don't do that. The other agent may actually be right. So I might say they certainly could be right. Did they walk through the specific sales, the current competition, the buyer behavior, the strategy that they would use to achieve a number? Notice I never said they're buying the listing. I didn't say they don't know what they're doing. I didn't pull out a voodoo doll of that competing agent and start putting pins in it. I brought the conversation back around to evidence and strategy. Everything revolves around the fact that you're giving them the best advice possible. They may say, we want to think about it. There's a great Tom Hopkins line. No problem. I'll be here on the sofa. Let me know when you finished. I'm kidding about that, by the way, but it's he calls it the sandbag close. We want to think about it. Absolutely. What specifically would you like to think about? And that sometimes takes them a little off guard, because what we want to think about it is never actually their objection. It's the wrapping paper around whatever their objection really is. They may be worried about our commission. They may not be convinced on price. Maybe one spouse isn't quite ready to sign. Maybe they have two more agents coming tomorrow. Maybe they want to sell it themselves. We want to find those answers out so that we can handle those objections. Third one is we want to try selling it ourselves. Again, don't attack. Say that makes sense. What would happen during that period for you to consider it successful? Then explore pricing and buyer access if they're doing it on their own, how well qualified buyers are, the safety. There's a great case study in WinGap where somebody had a for sale by owner sign out front, and somebody came by, duct taped the husband and wife chairs, and robbed the place. You don't want to scare them, but you want to give them good feedback as well. Who's negotiating as a third party in your best, get the best price? Who's going to help you go over the contracts? You're going to have to hire an attorney for that. What happens when they ask you for inspections and want to renegotiate on that? And if it under appraises and the financing, getting the settlement. So all these are things we have to talk about, but we have to first ask, when they say they want to sell it themselves, that may make sense. What needs to happen during that period for you to consider it successful? Arguments rarely create listings. They do, however, create really long drives back to the office. And this slide reinforces something I want to make clear about objection handling. The objective is never to defeat the objection. The seller is not your enemy. We do not score points because we successfully cornered somebody in their kitchen. Think about the objection. Absolutely. What specifically would you like to think about? That question creates permission for the real concern to come out. I might want to sell for sale by owner. Well, that makes sense. What would need to happen during that period for you to consider it successful? Again, I'm not saying selling it yourself is a terrible idea. I'm asking them to define success. And if they say we'd like to try it for 2 weeks, and if we don't get an offer at our price, and we probably list it with you, now we have a conversation. Maybe we talk about whether 2 weeks is enough to test the market. Maybe we talk about how they're going to qualify buyers. Maybe we talk about what happens if an unrepresented buyer makes an offer. And now we're dealing with the actual plan rather than simply arguing about whether or not they should sell it themselves. Objection handling is more discovery with a little bit more tension. The goal is not to prove that selling FSBO is impossible. People have assembled IKEA furniture without instructions. Occasionally it works. And once the listing's signed, we move to that final C, which is confirmation. A lot of agents think the listing appointment ends when the seller signs. It doesn't. That's when our relationship with them actually begins. We're going to confirm what we established. We're going to confirm communication expectations, because otherwise they get mad later when you're not calling them every week. We confirm showing procedure. And by the way, I've got some clients who call me daily. Showing procedures, how that's going to work, how we're going to get feedback to them, how we're going to review the price strategy if things don't work out in the first 2 weeks, the offer process, how we're going to handle that, how we're going to make decisions, what the availability is of the sellers in the next meeting. And why this matters, almost every listing relationship that becomes frustrating later had warning signs at the beginning. The agent thought, I'll call when something happens. The seller thought they're going to call me every Monday and every Friday, but nobody discussed it. And 3 weeks later, the seller says, I never hear from you. And the agent says, well, there's nothing to report. That's not a market problem. It's an expectations problem. So we want to go through how are showings approved? Does the seller require 2 hours notice? Can we use electronic scheduling, showing time? What happens if an offer arrives at 9:30 at night? Who makes the final decision? And if we have no offer after 3 weeks, when do we review price? I want to define those things now. A signed listing agreement creates authority. So we're going to confirm this, and that creates alignment with the seller. Otherwise, we begin a relationship with everybody enthusiastically agreeing to some things that nobody ever discussed. So the first few days are extremely important, and we want to make them concrete. We're going to do, on the agent side, arrange the photography, finalize the listing remarks, which you can do with C21 Time University. You can plug in the information. It'll build a beautiful listing remark and flyer for you. Build the marketing, enter it in MLS, and prepare to launch. And then make sure we've got the contact priority. We've got to contact our priority prospects. The seller is going to complete the seller disclosure. Hopefully you're using Seller Shield and they're completing it online and sending it back to you, because that saves us some lawsuits later. Complete the agreed preparation. In other words, touch up paint, clean stuff up, clean out the closets, whatever they're doing. Provide documents, HOA documents, and so on, and confirm the showing instructions. And I want both lists in writing. Okay, we'll get everything going. What does that mean? When? Who's doing it? What happens first? Well, the photography is Wednesday at 11. You'll have your disclosure finished by Tuesday evening. I'll have the listing draft you by Thursday. We'll approve it Friday morning and we'll launch Friday afternoon. Now we've got a project. Being specific beats vague every time. Assignments with names and dates creates accountability, and it also creates confidence. The seller knows something's happening and you know exactly what you promised. I'll get to it soon is not a project management system, despite popularity. And while we're getting specific, let's also establish how we're going to communicate. One of the simplest things you can do to improve your relationship with the seller and get referrals over time is ask the seller, would you prefer a scheduled weekly update or immediate communication whenever something meaningful happens, or would you like both? And then ask what's best for you, texting, emailing, or phone calls. Who gets contacted? Is it the husband, the wife, the second cousin? What counts as urgent? How is showing feedback going to be delivered, and how are we going to present offers? Why it matters is that the most seller frustration isn't necessarily caused by lack of activity. It's caused by uncertainty. Do you know right now, in Pennsylvania, the average seller is trying to cancel the listing in week 7. That was a statistic that just came out from PAR. 7 weeks into the listing, the seller's frustrated because they expected things to happen faster. They're unhappy with the communication with the realtor, and they try to cancel the listing. So we've got to make sure we front load this. We've got to make sure that we take out that uncertainty up front. They don't know if anybody's called in the house. They don't know whether buyers hated the kitchen if we don't give them feedback. They don't know whether there's another showing scheduled. They don't know if we're doing anything at all. We want to make that invisible visible. Silence creates stories. The seller's imaginary story about what you're doing is rarely, I'm sure my agent's executing a sophisticated long-term marketing strategy. It's usually, I don't think my agent's doing anything. So here's some practical language. Every Monday, I'm going to send you a summary of showings, feedback, and online activity, and anything I believe we should adjust. If an offer comes in or anything needs immediate attention, I'm going to call you immediately. Now everybody knows. Communication doesn't eliminate problems. It prevents uncertainty from becoming another problem. Now, pulling all this together, the 9 C's. Comfort. You don't have to make any decisions today. The pressure goes down. Show them that you care. I've already researched your home and competing market. They see some preparation. Building a connection. It sounds like timing before school starts really matters. I want them to feel heard. Control. May I suggest an agenda so we use your time effectively? We establish a sequence for the appointment. Clarify. What would the ideal move look like? We discover the goal. And crystallize. So your priorities are timing, net proceeds, and minimal disruption. We confirm that understanding. Consult. Based on that, here's the strategy I recommend. And now we present. And then close. Does this accomplish what you told me you wanted? We test that alignment, and then we confirm with, here is exactly what happens next. That's the whole framework. And what's missing from this are tricks, manipulation, and pressure. There's no secret sentence that hypnotizes somebody into signing a listing agreement. It's just a better structured conversation. The 9 C's are not 9 closing techniques. They're 9 stages of trust. And this might be the simplest one of the whole presentation. Under the traditional format, the agent talks. Under controlled selling, we want to hear what the seller has to say. Under the traditional form, the agent presents, and under control, the agent diagnoses their problem. Under traditional, the agent persuades or sells. Under controlled selling, the agent leads. Under traditional, the agent does closing. Under controlled selling, the process closes itself. That doesn't mean we never talk. Clearly, I've demonstrated today that I'm capable of talking. It means our talking is driven by what we learn. The presentation is responsive rather than rehearsed. The recommendation is earned rather than posed. And the close is a consequence of alignment. The best listing appointment is not the one where the agent talks the most. Volume of words is not a fiduciary skill. And that brings us to one idea I hope you remember even before you forget the slides. This is all a process. And it's going to take you a long time. I shouldn't say it's going to take you a long time. It takes 63 to 65 repetitions for something to form a neural pathway in your brain. And that neural pathway lets you reflexively do this every time you got an appointment. So we need to have you doing more listing appointments, of course. We need you to go along on other people's listing appointments when possible. Bring somebody along so that everybody learns techniques. But you need to learn all of this by practice drilling and rehearsing it, by having some of these lines down so you can reflectively close. Now I'm not going to go into it today. Online, we've got lots and lots of versions of me going through the listing presentation itself. By the way, Taniko called it Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that is the diagram. I just applied it to real estate here. So I hope that this was helpful to you. I'm going to stop share for today. I'll stop recording also. I hope this was helpful to you.